Good morning, everyone. Alrighty. So the meeting's supposed to start at 10:30. So we're at 10:40 now. We want to give some time for people who might have trouble finding the building. But thank you for coming to participate today. My name's Pam Wade. I'm with the South Florida Water Management District. My team at the district is called the Everglades and Estuaries Protection Bureau. What we do is pretty much focused on water quality, monitoring networks, source controls, and research. We're here today because the Florida legislature directed the district to do rulemaking, and the rulemaking is specific to support the overall strategies for the Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. So we have about a 30-minute presentation. Stephanie Olson, a longtime scientist with the district, will be presenting. At the end of that presentation, we'll take comments and questions and discussions. And then even after the meeting, we'll hang around for as long as we need to answer any questions that people who are more comfortable with that kind of question environment would be best with. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. So can we go to the next slide? Okay. So today I'm here to talk to you about something called Chapter 40E-61 of the Florida Administrative Code, which is also known as the Works of the District Rules. And as Pam mentioned, my presentation is fairly brief. It's about 19 slides, so if you could please hold your questions and comments to the end, we'd really appreciate that. One other housekeeping business, the restrooms are located out through those doors and to the right if anybody needs to use them. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to begin today by reminding everybody what these rules do. These rules prescribe how entities connect to the district's surface water management system for the purposes of protecting water resources. That's what the existing rules do. And today we're going to cover a number of different topics, like why we need to revise these rules. And we're also going to look at the affected geographic areas and the current water quality conditions. We'll be looking at the history of the restoration efforts within these areas, and we'll look at the activities of the agencies involved in restoration. We're also going to discuss the current statutory directions for these rules and some items that we need to consider as we discuss rulemaking and think about it. We'll also present a draft concept on the rule, and we will wrap up with our timeline, our workshop schedule, and how you can stay involved. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start, I'm going to take this out of here so I can show you this map that we have on the left-hand side of the slide. This is a map of the northern Everglades watersheds, which consists of the Lake Okeechobee watershed, which is in purple, the St. Lucie River watershed, which is in a like a orangish yellowish color, and then the Caloosahatchee River, which is in a green. And you can see there is overlap between these watersheds. So the reason we are doing rulemaking is specifically because the Florida statutes require the district to amend the Lake Okeechobee rules and to develop new rules for the river watersheds. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering, well, why would the legislature say to do that? And these three graphs represents each of the different watershed areas. And the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has determined that the three water bodies are impaired. And then they have set something called total maximum daily load or restoration goals for each of these areas. And on these particular graphs, on the left-hand side, you'll see the restoration goals. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the current water quality conditions. So that kind of explains why we need restoration in these areas. Next slide, please. So I want to give you a little bit of the legislative history within these areas. It all began in 1987 with when the Florida legislature passed something called the Surface Water and Improvement Management Act. And there was a portion of that act specifically devoted to Lake Okeechobee, and that had a number. It was 373.4595. And that's what the existing rules were based off of. And since then, there's been many changes, and that particular piece of legislation today is known as the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. Now, I've listed on the slide several of the changes, and I'm just going to highlight some of them. One of the things I do want to highlight is there's actually a second statute called 403.067, and that particular statute governs how the Florida Department of Environmental Protection determines that water bodies are impaired and how they set up their total maximum daily loads or restoration goals. And in 2005, that particular statute was amended to say that DEP could use something called Basin Management Action Plans, or BMAPs, as plans for the restoration of these areas. But it said they could use it. They didn't have to. Then in 2007, that's when 373.4595 became the NEP, or the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. And that is when it was expanded to include the river watersheds. Between 2012 and 2014, that is when DEP did develop basin management action plans for the 3 watersheds. Now in 2016, we had a number of changes. First of all, the NEP was changed to state that DEP must develop basin management action plans for the Northern Everglades watersheds. So it's now a requirement. The other thing that happened in 2016 was that is when that is when the legislature said that the district must revise 40E-61. So looking back at all the statutory changes, the underlying authorities for the existing rules have been changed such that the existing rules are obsolete and the district must essentially start from scratch with these rules. The other thing that happened in 2016 were that the coordinating agency roles were redefined. Now the coordinating agencies are the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the South Florida Water Management District. And on the next slide, I'm going to go into a little bit more about what their roles are. So DEP has the lead on water quality with the Basin Management Action Plans. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services has the lead on agricultural BMPs, and the district has a lead on hydrologic improvements through the watershed protection plans, which consists of a research and water quality monitoring program and the construction projects. And Chapter 40E-61, that is a program under the protection plans. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that you kind of know where 40E-61 fits into the picture, now I want to kind of cover what the statute, the 2016 statute, specifically directs for 40E-61. And we kind of covered the first 2 bullets already. We have to revise the rules for Lake Okeechobee, and we have to come up with new rules for the rivers. These rules, the statute also says that these rules must be consistent with the NEP statute itself and with 403.067. Remember, that was that other statute that governs basin management action plans. The NEP statute also says that the district must develop monitoring requirements for those entities who are not implementing BMPs, either through the DAX BMP program for ag or through DEP for non-ag. And the 2016 NEP also requires a research and water quality monitoring program. Now this slide zooms in a little bit more to the boundary. The existing rule boundary right now is shown on the map on the left side of this slide. And then we've taken that same boundary and superimposed it over the NEP boundary. So you can see, to be consistent with the NEP, we're also going to have to expand into this upper region here, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Okay, next slide. Okay, so before we get into the draft concepts, there's a few things I'd like to mention for us to think about before we cover that. But I also want to step back and explain why we do not have draft rule text. At our October governing board, we received a lot of comments when we presented our concept about the fact that we did not have draft rule text to present out at our workshops. This watershed, the Northern Everglades watershed, covers about 5 million acres and is very diverse. We have urban areas and we have very rural areas. So staff felt like, well, we might be able to draft something and maybe it would work for 60% of the stakeholders, but maybe for another 40%, it might cause an undue hardship. So we really wanted to come out and discuss concepts with the public and get some feedback on that before we drafted rule text. There will be opportunities to comment on draft rule text. After this round of workshops, we are going to go back, we're going to draft some text, and we will be coming back out for a second round of workshops where we will do a meeting just like this where we'll have the draft rule text and we will hear from stakeholders about that. So some other things that we want to consider when we're looking at the rulemaking is what did the legislature direct the district to do? We would like to look for any potential gaps in the restoration efforts to see if there's places this rules can fill in. It would have to, of course, be within our legislative authorities. We will also look at current water quality conditions, and we want to avoid duplication with other regulatory programs. And we have a draft framework that we're going to present to you today. And of course, we want input from the stakeholders so we can draft reasonable rules. Next slide, please. So here's the overall draft concept, which consists of 3 components. There's a monitoring component, which has 2 parts. The first part is to provide requirements for those who are not implementing BMPs through DACs or DEP. Now, the second part of the component has to do with reviewing existing monitoring networks that the district has, with maybe also some input from other monitoring networks. We presented this in Okeechobee, and we got a lot of feedback because the maps that we've handed out, those just represent the district's monitoring network and its expansion. But there are other entities that are conducting monitoring in various areas, and we do have the maps over here that show, okay, thank you. That particular map, if you want to look at it when we're done, that one shows the nutrient monitoring sites that DEP has in its Watershed Information Network, or WIN database. So the sites that are that represents are sometimes collected by other entities like Reedy Creek, or I think there's even like City of Cape Coral has some sites in there. There's lots of entities, and you'll find some overlap with our monitoring stations because some of our monitoring stations are in WIN as well. So I'll leave that for after. So the idea is to look at the monitoring network and to determine where we could represent nutrient levels in contributing areas. Then we could use the data from the monitoring to assist with research and to evaluate projects and nutrient reduction technologies, and also to inform the coordinating agencies so that they can make informed decisions. We would, after we collect the data, we would need to do some sort of assessment to see if we are making progress. And then the rules could also encompass defining when an action would need to be taken. We would have some kind of trigger and say, oh, okay, looks like we need to do something here. And then we would also want to define in the rules what that action would be. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to go into those concepts a little bit more in the next few slides, but right now I do want to, again, step back and just remind everybody that when we're considering the ideas for these rules, we have to remember that what works really well for some stakeholders may cause a severe hardship for other stakeholders. And we want to, as we're crafting them, avoid unintended consequences, and we also want to make sure that the rules are reasonable and practical. Also, all the ideas will have to be compared against the district's legislative authorities to make sure that we have the authority to do the requirements that we are asking. Next slide. Okay, so back to the concepts. The first part of the concept for the monitoring component was developing rules that will define requirements for those not implementing BMPs. And whatever we whatever kind of text we put in this area, it will have to be consistent with DEP's statewide rule. There is a statewide rule for this as well. And we gave, I believe, handouts with that statewide rule text if you're interested. Now, there are some things that we can consider, though. We have to be consistent, but we could maybe be more specific than DEP was for this area. And I've kind of listed a few things, how we could get more specific if we think that's necessary. The other thing we can consider is we want to make sure that whatever we're requiring is practical. We did hear a lot of comments at our board meeting about the difficulties of conducting monitoring in the Northern Everglades. So we have to have something that's practical for people to implement. And then there may be other ideas that you may want to present when we get to the comment period. Thank you. Okay, back to the draft monitoring concept. And again, this map right here on this slide and the ones you have in your packet only include the district's monitoring network. And you'll find for the 3 watersheds, what we've done is we have red squares, which represent the basin level monitoring. And it's at those sites where we have a measurement of flow and concentration so we can calculate a load. And I'm just going to give a little example here. This little basin here is called Fish Eating Creek. So we have a monitoring site here which represents the load coming from Fish Eating Creek. Now you'll see upstream of that we have green circles and we have yellow circles. The green circles is where the district has existing what we call upstream monitoring sites. And the yellow is where we're going to be adding some additional sites. And these sites are typically concentration only, and they're used to highlight areas within a basin that may need further attention. And one other thing I do want to point out, the district's expanded monitoring is going to do speciation of the nutrients, so we'll have an idea if the phosphorus is dissolved or maybe particulate, and that will be helpful too in determining what types of projects. So once we have the data from our network, and I failed to mention on that last slide, again, we can look at also the data that it's in WIN. Then we will need to assess that data and determine what actions need to be taken. So we would want to look at, are there existing long-term trends? We would want to identify what kind of statistical tests we're going to use to evaluate the data. Will we simply use averages, or will we look at trend analysis? We may also want to consider a combination of factors and the context. And the reason I say that is there are areas within the Northern Everglades watershed. There are basins that have decreasing trends, but relative to the other basins, they have very high what we call unit area loads, which is if you take the load and you spread it over the acreage for that area, it's very high compared to the others. So that may mean we still think that something should happen in that area versus another, even though it has a nice decreasing trend. So these are things we need to think about. Okay, once we've determined that, hey, we have a problem, we need to trigger some sign of action, we need to define what those actions are. And I've listed a few, I'm sure there's many more. One of the first things would be communicate these results to our coordinating agency partners so that they could reevaluate the BMPs. And with our newest information on the types of nutrients involved, say if they notice that there's more particulate phosphorus in an area, if we were reporting that, then the agency, either DAX or DEP, could get with their entities that they're working with and recommend that they implement more sediment controls. Another type of action that could be triggered, maybe we need to do additional water quality investigations. Maybe that will trigger us to look more at what is in WIN, or maybe we'll need to go out and do some additional sampling. The district might need to do that as well. Another action that could be triggered, we could implement additional regional projects, such as the Lakeside Ranch stormwater treatment area. Or another type of action might be requiring improved water management systems. And perhaps that could be done through some type of cost share program. And by improved water management systems, I'm talking about possibly tailwater recovery. We brought some brochures from Southwest Florida. They have a cost share program for tailwater recovery systems, and those are available if anybody's interested to review those. Okay, so now we've kind of got through all the ideas for the concepts. I want to just kind of wrap up with a couple of things. Our timeline, can you click that down here? We are currently right here. Oops, sorry. We're right here. We're at our workshops with the concepts. And we, once we wrap these up, as I said, we're going to go back, we're going to draft rules, and then we're going to come back out, hopefully the end of January, and do meet in the same areas and meet with everybody again. Right now we're on a timeline to try to finish up the rulemaking in April of 2021. Next. And this is our draft workshop schedule. This is the third version of this same workshop we've done. We've done it in a couple other locations because the watershed's so large. We're going to Stewart tonight, and tomorrow we have our last one in West Palm Beach. So next slide. Okay, so lastly, I want to thank you again for coming and let you know how you can stay involved. We're happy to meet with you today, and we're going to open it up for comments in just a moment. Also, we have a website that you can go to. There's the link at the bottom of this slide. It will take you, you need to click on 40E-61 when you go there, and then it has, well, it has the presentations from the previous workshops. It will have the handouts that you're getting today, and also the presentations from the board. So you can also leave a comment there. You can give us, you can meet with us today and give us comments. We'll be taking public comments, and you can even hand us comments, handwritten comments. We take comments in all form. So I was asked at another workshop, when do you need comments by? We would really like comments by November 30th, if they're going to be incorporated in the next draft rule text, because we're going to really start crafting that in December. So hopefully you can give us your comments by then so that they can be included. And with that, we're going to open it up to public comment, and we'd ask you to please come forward here, and because we only have one mic, and state your name for the record and who you're representing. So do we have any comments or questions?
I know November 30th is right around the corner, so if you submit comments even through December, that would be fine. We'll be in the process of drafting things through the month. So.
I'm Dave Dunn from H&A side. Question, in lieu of BMPs, correct? If we have BMPs initiated and signed up, we're void for that. We don't have to do anything with this. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, so the question was, if you're implementing BMPs, do you have to do anything under these rules? And for those that are implementing BMPs, for the component part that talks about, you would not have to do individual monitoring. For the second part of that component, where we're maybe going to highlight areas that may need additional things, it could be possible that, you know, if we present to, I assume you're implementing with DAX, if we present to DAX that there's an area that may need additional things, it is possible that it might impact you that way, but that would be through the Department of Agriculture. Yes. Or DEP. Yes. Can you,
I don't like to go in front of people. I just have a question. We Rollover Street. The loading that the legislators kind of enacted, how does that compare with the rest of the country that is similar to ours? Say like in the Mississippi area, the Louisiana area, South Georgia area. Are we being asked to do something that is really outlandish, or are we kind of in the middle of the things, or has anybody else enacted anything like this?
Okay, thank you for that comment and question. Well, that was a very good question. DEP is actually the group that determines the load requirements for the areas. I don't personally know what the requirements are in the Midwest.
I'm not concerned about the Midwest. I'm concerned something very similar to us, say like the Mississippi, with a lot of farming, a lot of agriculture, where encroaching upon the rural areas and the urban areas meet as well, as far as and the topography is similar to ours.
Okay. Yeah, it is dependent on the receiving water body, and well,
DEP through the 403.067 statute, they develop these total maximum daily loads based on what the receiving body can absorb and still maintain its natural ecosystem. So for
Take into consideration of available and non-available, say phosphorus.
It's whatever's going into the lake that's measured that is how they determine whether the total maximum daily load is met. But when you go into your BMPs, that's where DACs will look to see whether you're complying with implementing your BMPs properly by looking at what's available in your soils, how much you're applying, how much is discharged based on what's coming out of your property. So that's where they look at the micro level, what's happening in the soils and what's happening on individual properties.
But what I'm getting at kind of is sometimes the landowners, it's out of their hands as far as if you're counting unavailable phosphorus. I'm talking about phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
If you're counting unavailable phosphorus, it's kind of out of a lot of the upland landowners' hands. Because I mean, we're not really don't want to deal with it. You know, I mean, there's a lot of unavailable phosphorus that's being counted that it's actually we're not generating.
When we're measuring phosphorus at these loading sites into the lake, we're looking at phosphorus speciation. We're looking at available phosphorus. So what's going into the lake is possibly different from what's coming out of the different properties collectively. And that's because there's a lot of things happening from the discharge point upstream and where it gets in the lake. Where you may discharge, it may get picked up by someone else's irrigation water, so there's a lot of interaction going on throughout these properties and within the watershed. So that's where this method of determining compliance with TMDL has got to do with what's being measured going into the lake. DEP will then have to develop methodologies on how they're going to look upstream to see when actions need to be triggered. So right now all we know is that the TMDLs have to be met based on water quality measured going into the lake. So what are we doing upstream? You know, what triggers upstream actions? That's dependent on the DACS program, the DEP's Basin Management Action Plan, and then eventually this rule and how the rule relates to triggering actions by DACS and DEP. So they may look at what you're talking about. Well, is it available? How far are you away from the receiving body? There are different things that need to be considered, and that's why they would, this rule might trigger more detailed investigative actions to see, well, maybe you do have unavailable phosphorus, so it's not really getting into the system. So that would be more of getting at the micro level once they determine what are the highest priority areas to really spend time on. And that would be, again, from the DEP's viewpoint. Not sure I answered your question fully, but okay.
Pick on these landowners. What about St. Cloud, Kissimmee, Orlando? Are you going to put them under the same thing as you put us?
Yes, these rules would be for ag and non-ag.
Todd Harvey, so the individual landowner that has a half-acre lot, he's going to be regulated just like the landowner. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, the rules, remember, right now what we're trying to develop is a concept where we identify where there's areas where actions are needed. And both DEP and DAX, DEP is responsible for non-ag, DAX is responsible for ag. So we would say there is an issue in this particular area, and those respective agencies would have to work with their constituents within that area.
Just to add to what Stephanie was saying, again, this rule is just about monitoring and then identifying trends maybe, or identifying just areas that have the greatest load coming from the watersheds. DEP is really the one that enforces water quality, so they would be the ones that decide, okay, what really needs to be done based on the data that the district's collecting under these rules. When it comes to ag or non-ag under different size parcels, that's really for DEP and DAX to decide how they're going to handle those. So if it's agriculture, Department of Agriculture is looking at, well, what do we need to do? Like right now, their BMP manuals are more for producers that are commercial, I believe, and they're trying to come up with how they'll handle these smaller entities. So that's really something they're working on. DEP is doing the same with the non-ag. So we're really more of the data collection, data analysis, reporting trends, and then passing that to DEP and DAC so that they can do something with it under their programs.
Well, don't you think that it's important that DEP gets all of it combined before they roll out one entity?
That's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to collectively, that's what this map over here shows all of the data that they've been finding throughout the watershed, not just district data, not just DEP data. They're looking at where else is there data that can be used to help identify where problems exist so that they can be better informed in taking action, and taking action in the areas that are the highest priority that's going to have the greatest impact.
How do we have what do we find like DAX would have if we are troublesome or whatever?
Yeah, do we have a problem?
Do we have a problem? I mean, problems on, I mean,
Well, what would really be handy, it looks to me like if you had a map and you had it kind of color coded to where it merged in different colors where the hot areas are now. Do you have anything like that existing?
DEP is working on that right now.
DEP is?
DEP is.
We may not have a problem. We may not have a problem at all. We might be right.
I believe they've got some things on their website right now. Right now they're trying to establish benchmarks that would trigger some kind of action within certain basins within these large watersheds. So I believe they have on their website some maps that show different ranges of nutrients within those areas, but they don't have, they haven't decided yet what to do about those areas. I mean, this is an evolving process. I mean, this is just like different steps that will collectively hopefully meet the TMDL 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Well, is this just for phosphorus or is this other?
Nitrogen and phosphorus. This rule specifically is just for nutrients. So we're collecting data on nutrients in response to DEP's TMDLs for nutrients.
On this map, the yellow dots are proposed? Yes. Okay, so there's no data coming from that now?
There is data because we have historic data from those sites, but there is a gap in our collection at those sites. So we're going to reinstate those sites come January. So there is historical data, many, many years of historical data on the yellow sites too.
My name is John White. My question is, we've been doing collection of data for the last 15 years or so. Has that data, has the TDMLs and the phosphorus loads, the nutrient loads, have they decreased through all these projects that everybody's been working on, BMPs and all that? Has the loads decreased over the years? If they're not, then we need to look at something else.
Well, Pam just brought up the slide of the current water quality conditions, but I'm actually going to go to a map.
On those, what you're seeing is one graph is for each watershed. One's liquid.
Yes, but those, on that graph, the small graph bar is what's proposed
Correct.
What was it 15 years ago? And we decreased what we've been working on for 15 years. And if it hasn't, this has been working for the last 100 years. It's not going to happen overnight.
It's increasing, and we need to at least get into the decreasing state, and it's not expected to happen. This is a long-term process. I mean, that if you look at the DEP Space Management Action Plan, it's very clear in there that it's meant to be a long-term process.
And if I can add to that, and I hear what you're saying, because I know there have been a lot of farmers and ranchers that have been implementing BMPs for a long time, and I know it can kind of be discouraging. But there are areas within the watershed, and I'm going to point to this one right here. It's called the S191 Basin. And that's where there's been a lot of projects, a lot of BMPs have been implemented. And if you look at the historic data and you compare it to current data, there actually has been decreases in that basin. The problem is at the same time that this little basin was doing some decreasing, and although I will say it still has very high unit area loads, there have been other areas of the watershed that started increasing. And so when you measure the TMDL, which they're measuring it right now, that goes into the lake, that's why you don't necessarily see that anything has changed through the years. But if you look at the smaller areas individually, you can see the changes. And I think that is where DEP is moving, and those are some things that we can do with these rules as well.
Can you point out on that map where the areas are increasing?
I was just going to say, if you want to tell them where in the sphere they can look at individual areas in the data.
That is a good point. Yes, in the South Florida environment.
Have that information so detailed here that we can show. You might know off the top of your head.
You're there, you should know.
Well, actually, I do know that there were some increasing loadings in Indian Prairie subwatershed, but I think more recently that has also started decreasing again. But again, if you really want to look at the data and get into the details, as Pam was suggesting, you might want to look at our South Florida Environmental Report. If you go to the district's website, Chapter 8 is the chapter that covers the lake. And there will be a table in Chapter 8, and it will list all of the loads. It will list the unit area loads from each of those basins and subwatersheds. It's an annual report, so you would have to, if you want to see how it changed, you'd actually have to go back and look at several reports to see, well, how does this year look compared to last year? But you could print out that table in that chapter, and that's where I would suggest you go. Okay. Yes. I was talking about the subwatershed as a whole, which is quite large. So no, it's not. Well, we need to look, when we do our review of data, we need to look at all sources, ag, non-ag, state-owned, whatever.
And even where we have state-owned land we're releasing, we have to do
Yes, as Pam just mentioned, where we have leases for state-owned lands, the lessees are required to, or for district-owned lands, thank you, the lessees are required to implement best management practices.
Well, and we understand that, but I'm going to be blunt here. I'm tired of being around the bush. We feel like that ag has been picked on, okay? My question to you, and I think Kevin's question and his question is, are the homeowners with a quarter-acre lot that encompasses 300 acres, a bunch of multiple lots in there, are they going to be held to the same standards that we have as ag?
Nobody's excluded. At this point, nobody's being excluded from any of the BMAP requirements. So
But they're going to have to do the testing too.
the testing is going to depend on what DEP says for those areas. So that's not really what this rule gets into. So we're talking about at a higher level under the bigger plan, the Basin Management Action Plan. So that would be the non-ag BMPs, best management practices, which falls under DEP. Just like Department of Agriculture is trying to develop ways to handle those smaller entities. DEP is looking at similar things. With homeowners. And you know, the homeowners are required, if there are new developments going in, there's new building, construction, they're all required to have detention systems, which is probably the best BMP you can have. So
What about fertilization of the yards and all that?
that's all part of the non-ag BMPs also. So.
Local governments have a permit that DEP issues them to discharge waters. All local governments do. It's called our MS4 permit. And under that permit, they are required to do certain things. One's education, one's illicit discharge. So all the subdivisions are typically covered under the municipality's MS4 permit, and if there's a problem coming out of a subdivision or out of an area, that's up to the local government then to enforce on that subdivision. It kind of, the state passes it down to local enforces on the localized area. So that's how that part works. Typically, if there's an issue that's notified, you know, we get notice from the state or whatever, it's typically handled that way.
You had a question?
Good morning, Stacy Strickland, University of Florida, IFAS Extension. So actually the one question that I had was regarding existing BMPs. There was a presumption of compliance, and that was actually mostly to avoid monitoring situations. Has anything changed in that regard?
There is still a rebuttable presumption of compliance in the statute. It's actually called a rebuttable presumption of compliance. Yes.
The statute says, related to that presumption, that if there's water quality problems detected through monitoring, then there may need to be more done, and that would be DEP that would determine that. And if it were ag, they would be doing it through Department of Agriculture. So that's what rebuttable means. It's presumed as long as we don't find out otherwise through measured data.
I got a question. How many more government jobs is all this going to create? Have they ever thought about that?
We've been cutting FTEs for years, so I don't think we're going to get any more.
Kimberly Lawrence, Reedy Creek Improvement District. My only comment is I know that you're monitoring for phosphorus nitrogen species, and the TMDLs is based on load. One of the big, I think, data gaps that we have is flow, and I think that really needs to be looked at, because if you look at concentrations can continue to go down. You have a bad, stormy year, and your flow goes up, your load goes up. So it's dependent on flow, especially in this basin. We all know it's very flow dependent. We don't have minor flow areas. Even coming off of some of the little smaller basins, it's just lacking. So how are you anticipating measuring progress or measuring hotspots if there's no flow data?
Thank you for that comment and question. That is a really good question. Well, we do have the 3 tiers. We have our basin stations, which do have a component for flow measurements. So that is where we can calculate loads at the basin level. At the upstream level, there are some upstream sites that actually where we do have some flow measurements. There's not many. And we may need more. That may be something that, gets triggered when we, one of our actions might be we need to do additional monitoring. We may discover that there's some areas where we need to put in some additional flow monitoring. We're right now through this process, we're trying to look at There are some areas within the watersheds where we've had some measurements of flow, or where we think we could get measurements of flow. So we're trying to incorporate that when we can. And then of course the last tier would be the individual monitoring, which is only required for those not implementing BMP. So that is a really good comment. And we're going to do our best to address it as we can.
So that's really back to what we're trying to accomplish with the rule, is narrowing in on these areas that actually need attention, or bringing focus to those areas. So that might be one of the things that we can do with this rule, is say that based on loads coming out of certain subbasins, we need to establish more flow monitoring to do the investigative work within smaller levels, smaller scaled areas. Flow monitoring is very, very expensive, and you can't measure flow everywhere. It's difficult.
Yes.
Clifton Chapman, Double C Bar Ranch. I have a practical thought, and I know everyone's kind of touched on it, but, it's not a very high educated thought, but what in this state has decreased tremendously, and that's agriculture lands and the amount of inputs we put in. But what has increased tremendously, and that's development and residents. I understand working BMPs and everybody should do their part, but I really think there needs to be a stronger focus on where the big problem is. And I think everybody knows what the big problem is, but it always seems like we're not. We're trying to hide that because we're afraid of the backlash of all the voters, essentially, or the people. But I really think from, if you look on an outside perspective, where the problems really are. And obviously septic tanks are probably the #1 for nutrient offload, in my opinion. So I just wanted to put that little 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Stephanie mentioned that you can go to the South Florida Environmental Report, and if you can get to this link here, you can do a search at the top for SFER, which stands for South Florida Environmental Report. And if you go to Chapter 8, Appendix B? 8B1, we present the data for the year. You can go in and look for yourselves to see what the facts are. What is the data telling us? We don't even have to talk about, is it increasing or decreasing? You can look at the data there, and there's also land use maps there. So you can go there and find out for yourselves in which areas, based on what the land uses are, what's the water quality data coming out of those areas. So if you're, lots of times people think that it's coming from one area, and it may be, but sometimes it's totally different factual information. So, but all areas are contributing. It's just a matter of how much, where. Sometimes it's, some areas are more ag, some areas are more non-ag. So you can go look at the data for yourselves in that chapter.
Well, seeing no other comments, we really do appreciate each and every one of you coming. We appreciate all the comments and all the feedback. Again, if you'd like to stick around, we're going to be hanging out for a little bit. You can talk to us some more. And also, you can visit our website to leave comments.
And definitely, when we come out for that next round of workshops, make sure that you are involved and are able to get a copy of the draft rule, because that's when you're really going to have more specific ideas on how you may be influenced, and maybe we're, we've got unintended consequences and we might need to tweak the language in the rules. So that's a really important time for you to stay involved.
We don't have a specific date yet. We're hoping to begin the end of January, so it might be February. Well, it should be right on the website. We'll have our workshops listed on our website.
We left our emails up here. Are we going to get an email from you when we're going to have the next one?
You know what? We could do that. For the people that when we started these workshops, we didn't have any emails for people that we thought might be interested. But for people who have left their emails, if we can read them, we can send you, an announcement for the next. So make sure that you go back and check your handwriting.
You can also visit our website and sign up to be a stakeholder if you wish to.
How did you find out about today's workshop? Someone called you? Okay. Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, they're very involved. So they'll
Thank
probably
you.
do a similar outreach.
Okay. Yes.
One suggestion for you.
Yes.
You're gonna have another meeting here in this building. Do it beginning of February or the first of March. It's the middle of February, we have our fair.
Okay.
And it's very hard to get in.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay.
I know a lot of meetings South Florida Water Management have, they hold them in Orlando. These producers are not going up there.
This is okay
This
for
is a
location.
better location for you.
Okay. Okay. So you said beginning of February or beginning of March, but not in between. Got it. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Jim.
Next round of workshops and all that, you'll have somebody from DEP and FDAX.
We've got a FDAX representative here.
How about DEP?
We will try. We did have somebody from DEP at the Okeechobee meeting, but I guess they haven't been able to attend the Fort Myers, and they weren't here today. But we will try. We will tell them that was requested.
I just think it's good because we always see, it's kind of like a handoff, DEP, it's Florida Management District, and we all live this lane. So we don't crisscross with who's responsible for what. It'd be nice to have everybody in the same place, same room, and say, we understand these are our responsibilities, and we all are rowing in the same boat to get to the same end.
Yes, good point.
Sometimes what we tend to see a little different.
Mm-hmm.
One group might say this in a setting, and then they're saying something else that's different.
So the overarching strategy is the Basin Management Action Plan. So DEP does have BMAP meetings regularly, and the district and DAX does attend those. So we can look to see when the next BMAP meeting is. As a matter of fact, they're rewriting or updating the Lake Okeechobee BMAP, St. Lucie, and Caloosahatchee River BMAP. So they're actively holding meetings and drafting these updates and asking for public comment on those. So now's a good time to get involved.
The next one's going to be webinar.
A webinar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even when they're webinars, the district and DAX participates in those.
All right. Thank you again so much for coming. And we're going to be sticking around if you would like to talk to us. Thank you.